I thought I'd build a model railway in Engage. How hard can that be? So last time I was trying to pick a room in my house for an Engage model railway, and I ended up having to choose the smallest room in the house. So today I'm going to try and plan my layout and squeeze it into this small space. Let's get to it. Okay, so I thought I'd better start explaining where my track plans come from. Before I decided to build a model railway, I spent many years thinking about it, and it probably goes back about 15 years. And in fact, about 15 years ago, I was living in a different place, and I decided I might try and have a go at building or designing a model railway. It was a different house, so I had a different room to work in. And here, this red outline shows the outline of the room. You'll see it's a rectangular room, but with a little bit taken out of this corner. That's where there was an airing cupboard accessed from outside the room. And so what I wanted to do was to keep most of the layout within the footprint of a line sort of down here, so pretend that bit of the room wasn't available. I'd still have a reasonably large room with the layout sort of based in the corner, using up two of the walls. And I like the idea of the layout largely looking like a single line, but I didn't want it to be end to end. I wanted to be able to run trains around. So I put these loops at either end. So there we go. So it's a simple double line, and it loops around. So that was my first idea. But I then realised that those two loops took up lots of space, and that wasn't really what I wanted. So I started experimenting with a different idea. Perhaps I could have a track that went around, and coming off it, I could have perhaps a branch line or something going into a terminus station there. Maybe that would give me a way ahead. But I think part of the problem with that is I still just ended up with a circle of track, and I really wanted to avoid having a circle somehow. So I went a bit back to the drawing board, and I came up with something different. I came up with this. Now this has had a bit more sort of work on it, and you can see I was probably getting a bit better at using the software by then. So here you see I've got this long, or reasonably long, 4 tracks, and then here they split and they go around. And the idea here was that although it's a loop, and I go around, and I've still got one of these circles here. That was a bit more precisely designed, and I knew exactly how large it needed to be, and so on. It would still give me a reasonable length of, in this case, 4 tracks running along, and but I could also run it end to end. And this large loop round here gave me all sorts of options to do something interesting on this area. But I was still a bit unsatisfied, and I think the reason is it's still essentially just a circuit. It's still just going to have a train that runs around, and comes back and then runs around again. I suppose that's the definition of what a tail chaser is. But I put my thinking cap on and came up with a further refinement, and that was this. So I've still got the four tracks. I've still got them looping around and coming back. But the key change is just here, where you'll see this track rises up and goes over a bridge over these two middle tracks. And the effect of doing this is sort of to wrap the layout around on itself. Doing this makes this essentially one single track. You can follow along here along the outside. And here you go round on the outside, but when you get to here you duck under one of the tracks and suddenly you're on the inside, and you follow that around again, around on the inside and then over the bridge and you're back on the outside. And this was the key idea because it would allow me to run lots of different trains but all on the same track. And I could have the challenge of managing them without them running into each other, stopping at signals when the line ahead was closed, and so on. And I think that's about as far as I got with my plans in the old house. Looking through, I don't seem to have anything much further refined. I obviously had a few ideas here with this extra line here. I think I had the idea of somewhere breaking off from this track and having some sort of branch line somewhere, or maybe going to a station somewhere or something like that. And in fact, you can see on this version, before I put the bridge in here, I had actually had the idea of putting in some sort of crossover here. Perhaps I'm not sure about the elevations. Perhaps this was going up and over a bridge and back down. So I had here turned it into a single track with this crossover, but I think this was the more elegant solution. And in fact, the idea of this junction here was it came to me because there's a railway near where I used to live, near Basingstoke. The main line comes down from London, and after leaving Basingstoke, the four lines then split into two, going in two different directions. Two go down to the West Country, Salisbury, then on to Yeovil, and the other two go down to Southampton. And there's this sort of arrangement where one of the outer tracks rises up and then passes over the two middle tracks. And I think I was keen to model that. So after I moved to where I currently live, I thought I'd revive the model railway idea. And so I dug out the track planning software, and after deciding where I was going to build it, I started doing some planning. Now the room where I'm building it, the full outline of the room isn't really shown on this plan. But I'm building it against, this is a wall across the top here, and another wall down here, and there's then a door into the room here, and another wall there, and along this face is a large patio window. So this is the these two walls are really my best bet. Now, compared to my old design that I had thought about in my old house, unfortunately this room's a little bit smaller, so I've had to adapt things a bit. But you can see here I've gone for some of the same ideas. There's two tracks looping round on each other, and then a length of these 4 tracks running parallel. And over here I've also have this idea of one track rising up, going over a bridge over the 2 middle tracks, which wraps the main line round on itself. You see the main line is these two tracks going round like that. But I've done a bit more work on some of the other ideas, in particular adding some sort of a terminus, because part of the problem with this this one single line that wraps around on itself is it doesn't really have anywhere where it can stop at a station. In particular, this long straight up the back, that's all inside a tunnel, and also the whole of this this loop is also in a tunnel. So I thought I would have a turn off here. This is 2 tracks turning out, and obviously one of them has to go over a crossing, and then disappearing into a hillside where it goes up a rather complicated helix. Perhaps we'll talk about the helix again later, but it goes up a few levels of a helix and then out into the open at a higher level and across towards the back of the layout, and then eventually finishing in a 4 platform station which will be above this hidden loop. So this will be the sort of flat top at a higher level. There's a little bit of point work here going into we call the throat of the station, and the opportunity to head off towards a turntable with possibly a few sidings coming off it, perhaps an engine shed, something like that. This helix is a bit complicated. One of the reasons it's a bit complicated is that at the time this track breaks away and goes into the helix, it's at the same sort of level as these 2 tracks here at the back. However, I want to give myself as much space at the front as possible. I don't want this to be a large cylinder rising out of nothing. And so after the first loop around the helix, there's a small straight that then pushes the helix further back towards this wall. The helix is as large as I felt I could fit in with, but also as small as I felt I'd be able to make it work. And in the hidden areas, I've used minimum radius curves in order to give me as much space as possible. There's a hidden radius curve just there, and probably another one just in there. And also in this loop around, most of these curves are minimum radius, particularly in this inner circuit. What I can do is hide the tunnel sections of track so you can see the bits that will be visible. And so essentially what you'll be able to see is a four parallel lines running up to this bridge section and then diverging, with one disappearing off into a hill heading in one direction and the other two tracks heading around the front of the layout before disappearing into a hill in a different direction. And then at a higher level, another track emerging from the hill and then heading across the top. Just here there'll be the opportunity to build a large high bridge over a gorge, and I've also decided that these two straights here will form quite a long bridge, possibly a viaduct over a dip in the landscape. I don't think I'll put a river going under it, but I think it'll just be a viaduct across the landscape. As I approach the station, there is the opportunity to get to any one of the four platforms from either of the tracks. I imagine that trains will approach on this southern track here, or this track, and then leave on the other one. I'm planning on modelling a steam railway. I haven't quite decided on the era yet, but in order to do that with a terminus station, I need some way of turning the trains around. Now, I don't really know what I'm talking about here, so I'm making this up, but I imagine this might be facilitated by some sort of a shunter that would remove the coaches from the engine that had brought them in and put them in a different on a different platform, and that would then enable the engine to come back, go to the turntable, turn itself around, and then go and couple up with the coaches ready for the return journey. There's something else that I also wanted to add to this layout, which was an area of storage, somewhere where I could store trains, and somewhere that trains could go to be hidden from sight. So I wanted to have a staging yard. And if I hide the main track and turn on the hidden tracks, then you'll be able to see that. So this is where the main track comes in. It goes into this hidden loop, but in the hidden loop there's a couple of points which enable a train, rather than coming back out of the tunnel, to disappear down this long slow incline to a lower level, and by the time it arrives here it'll be a full 60 millimeters below the zero level. This is a little bit hard to see because of the helix and this tunnel that runs up the back. So let me just hide those as well. Here you can see I have an 8-track staging yard. I've struggled a little bit with drawing them all back together and also getting around this curve. And before I build this, I need to work out exactly where the supports for the helix are going to be coming from, because some of them may need to be in the middle of this yard. So I need to do a little bit of work to design that. But this will allow me to store up to eight different trains, and it means that I can have trains on these 4 main lines disappearing into the hillside, and then not reappearing, but coming down to the staging yard, a different train coming out and taking its place in the sequence. If I turn on the benchwork so that can be seen. Now I haven't fully designed all the benchwork yet. So this is the benchwork and also all the tracks. Now I've decided that one thing I need to be able to do is to take the layout out of the house. Unfortunately, the house isn't my house. It's a house I live in because of the job that I have. So there will be a time when I need to leave the house, and I'd hate to have to completely dismantle the layout and start again from scratch. So although it needs to be removable, it doesn't necessarily need to be regularly portable. So I designed it in 2 sections. There's the long section here along with the straight along the wall, and then there's this other section here with the helix and the staging yards. One of the things I've done is ensure that all 8 of the tracks that cross the join, which is just here, will cross exactly at right angles to it. I'm not sure whether that's necessary or helpful, but it'll give me some peace of mind to know that that's the case. And so obviously in these 8 sections, one of the things I need to do is find a way of building it such that they can be separated and still be aligned. I know there's all sorts of different ways of doing that, but that's one of the challenges, and that's one of the things that I need to fix, one of the things I need to work out how to do. So that's my current plan. I know there's all sorts of problems I need to work out how to solve before I get too deep into building it. As I mentioned, one of them is working out how to do the joins between the baseboards. Another one is to work out how to lay these tight curves. I need to know whether trains can go around curves that tight. I need to know whether coaches can be pulled around curves that tight. I need to know whether flex track can be laid that tight. And I need to know, in particular, I think one of the challenges is whether I can join flex track on curves that tight, because this curve here in particular, this inner loop, it is too long from here where it's sort of straight, where it changes from curving in one direction to the other. From there around the equivalent on the other side, that is longer than the length of a single piece of flex track. So there needs to be a join somewhere along that length. And from what I understand, reading everyone's advice from forums and so on, that's going to be challenging. I know this curve here is also minimum radius to 228 millimeters. That's also minimum radius, but it's shorter, so I can have a piece of flex track that starts on the straight, goes around the bend and ends on the straight, and I don't need to worry about joining on the curve. Another challenge is going to be laying the helix. Obviously that will require joins on the curve, although the radius of the helix is larger. I believe it's 330 millimeters for the inner loop of the helix. That may give me a bit more leeway. However, the design of the helix not being straight but moving slightly to one side after the first loop, that's going to give me a bit of a challenge with the bench work. I need to figure out how it's going to be supported and propped up. Another challenge is going to be up here with the station. I've put this in, this is just a circle, but it's the size of a standard Pico turntable. So I'm pretty sure I'll be able to get a turntable in there. And that'll give me a few options. There's a few different things I could do around there. But I'll want to motorize the turntable. And one of the reasons for going up as high as I do is to now allow enough clearance underneath for the mechanism for motorizing the turntable, so it doesn't interfere with the tracks beneath. I'm also excited here to be using a double slip. That's the only slip, single or double, that I've got in the layout. But I think there'll be some challenges in laying that, so I'm looking forward to that. And another challenge I've got is this crossing here. Need to find a way of ensuring that that doesn't lead to accidents. If there's a train coming down from the helix and crossing onto the main line, if it's about to cross there, how do I ensure that another train doesn't come barreling along this other line and crash into it? So lots to do, lots to keep me busy, lots of opportunities. Scenery wise, obviously it's going to be higher along the back edges than it will at the front. So I imagine it being quite mountainous, particularly around the helix and the back edge. That'll give me lots of opportunities for scenery. A nice high bridge there, and then possibly a bit slightly more rolling landscape as we come along here, with some sort of town scene around the station. I think there'll be a challenge in that the station is pretty high above these main lines here, and so that'll give me a landscaping challenge, making that look sensible. One idea that I've got is to have the actual station having elevated platforms with the station buildings underneath, and that would allow me to landscape the actual ground level to be a bit below where the actual tracks are at that point. That might make things a bit easier. Anyway, thanks for joining me on that little tour of my plans for my layout, and I hope that you will you'll join me on the journey as I try and build it. I may well be being a bit naive in my plans, but I suppose that's the way I'm going to learn, is by having a go.